I'd like to introduce you all to this concept to hopefully get us to what Kim was talking about earlier. And this, in Hawaiian, we call kanoho pani haka haka. That means the empty chair, which is really never empty. Parentheses around empty. Kanoho pani haka haka is what we start our meetings with. And we're encouraging boards and other groups that are working towards important things to always remember that the people, the thing, the concept that we're working and talking about should be present in the room. There's a tendency for us to forget that. And then it's easy to become, it's all about us. And so what we're doing now with boards and organizations working with that, we always take a moment to acknowledge and recognize the empty chair before anyone speaks. As we begin to get into our meetings, we take a pause now and then and say, okay, everyone consider the chair. Whether it's a whale, a tree, a child, a community, or a particular concept. And so I offer this as a gift to each of you in your organizations, is that if there is a way, whether it's an image or actually a chair, that you have present in your boardroom, that you have present in your conversations, or just you take a moment to acknowledge the empty chair. Hopefully that'll get us to what Kim was talking about. So, kanoho pani haka haka. With that in mind, as I suggested, it's all about stories, but it's all about questions. Are we asking ourselves the right questions? And when we sat down to talk about this, we were going all over the place, and we had to finally start asking the right questions, because we had all kinds of answers for you. And we began to ask us, are these the right answers? Did we just lose it? The power just went off.
We're still connected.
Yeah, the light. That's okay. That tree that you saw there was a monkey pod tree. And I brought that up because years ago, I had the good fortune of being mentored by several kupuna elders. This one particular elder was well known in the community. And he would call me up and say, boy, pick me up. Okay. So I pick him up and we drive around and we do these things and he'd point out things. He said, okay, let's go eat. So we went to stop at this private establishment up here. Back then I was like, wow, look at this place. And he would sit in that strategic spot in this restaurant. And he sat on the corner, and as he sat there and ate, everyone would come by. Mr. Senator, how are you? Justine, how are you? And everyone kissed the ring type of thing. And I was sitting there, I go, wow, this is pretty cool, man. So as I was eating one day, I said, Papa, endearment that I called it. I said, Papa, how did you get to where you got? And he ignored me. And I thought, oh, maybe he didn't hear me. So I waited, and he was eating, and he was eating. I said, Papa, how did you get to where you're at? And this time, he looked at me. Kim, I think it's the projector, the light went off. It might be the plug, I think. So he looks at me, and I can see this twinkle in his eye. So I knew he heard me. But he kept eating. I said, oh, now I'm in trouble. Then he finally put his fork down, wiped his mouth, and he looked up at me, and he said, boy, he points to the corner of the lot, and he goes, what kind of tree is that? Now keep in mind, this man was an agriculturalist. First thing he would do is check his trees before he checked his mail. So I looked at him and I said, monkey pod. He goes back to eating again. A few minutes later, he puts his fork down again, he looks at the other corner of the lot and says, what kind of tree is that? Monkey pod. It's a smaller one. That's how. And he started eating again. Okay? That was his answer. And so as I sat there thinking, I said, what the heck was that? And all of a sudden it dawned on me. His answer was time. Time and being in the right place at the right time, but also having the right protections, the right nutrients, right partners, right care. And he could see this smile break out in his face because he knew that at that moment there was intrinsic knowledge and awareness. The answer came from within. But more importantly, he answered the question that I was really asking, not the one that I posed. So, going back in your mind, what was the question that I asked him? Anyone? What was the question that I really asked him? How do I get there? Right? How can I get to where you're at? And in his kupuna wisdom, his knowledge, he was able to get me to a point to ask a different question. And as nonprofits, I'm finding that as the board chair in some cases and a worker bee in others, we're having to ask ourselves different questions. Because in many cases, the founders have set questions, the previous board has set different questions. And they have already established answers that we're trying to achieve. And maybe we aren't asking the right question. So Papa Lion really helped to set that up for me. So I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you like helping people? I'd be concerned if I didn't see the hands. I'm a non-profit sector. Helping people. So here's a story about helping. There was a monkey sitting in the safety of his tree. And behind him was a fish pond, and he heard a fish slapping around in the water, and he said, oh my goodness, I gotta go save this fish. So he jumps out of the tree, walks up to the pond, looks in the pond, and says, Mr. Fish, let me help you. And the goldfish looks over his shoulder and goes, okay. And so the monkey reaches into the pond and places the fish in the safety of his tree. He pats himself on the back, job well done. Now, did he do a good job, folks? No, of course not. We're all saying, what a dumb monkey. But here's the other part of the story. Didn't the fish say, okay? So the moral of the story is, before you monkey around in other people's business, make sure you're not a fish out of water. And for those of us, many of us find ourselves like this fish in a tree. You know, the fish didn't realize that it was exactly where it needed to be. But because so many people had offered it help over the years, it didn't know how to help itself. It didn't know what help to accept. The monkey, on the other hand, had come out of its own experiences and felt that it had all the answers and therefore was capable of giving it to everyone else, never asking the right question, whether or not the fish belonged in the pond or the tree. But I'd like to suggest there are entire cultural groups that are the fish today. And many of us in this very room are the monkeys trying to pull them out of the pond. And so as nonprofits, we've got to ask ourselves, at what point is the help for them or is the help for us? Because I'm engaged with a lot of conversations with organizations who are really more about staying alive today for the purpose of helping, or is it for the purpose of staying alive? Which is what Kim was talking about. At some point, if we ignore the empty chair, we tend to forget that. And so this concept of being stuck in a tree is something that sticks in my mind many times. So our concept of culture really is contextual. And as we all know, we're in Hawaii, in the context that shapes the content that we're talking about today, is that in Hawaii, from what I've been told, that we have probably more nonprofits per capita than any other place, which speaks to our general culture of who we are. We like helping people, right? They say that people that have the least to give are often the ones that give the most. And I think many of us find ourselves that way. And so when I look at Hawaii and what we have to offer in our culture, I also look at what's been happening here. I work with another organization that happens to be present today. And we're talking about this, and I think most of us recognize this. The world has changed, hasn't it? Just a few years ago, that was happening. There was all kinds of money flying around the place. There was a spigot, it was all coming out. Well, things have shifted, right? We're faced with a new scenario. The giving and funding community has definitely changed. There are more of us asking for it, fewer of them giving it, or fewer of it to go around. And so consequently, we are all stuck in this paradigm. But how many of us have shifted the approaches in which we ask? How many of us continue to use the same methodologies, whether it's a dinner table, or whether it's a fundraiser, or a particular thing? We're going after the same pot of funds, or the same opportunities, with the same methodologies and techniques, and yet, this is the condition they're facing. Now, earlier in my career, I also learned this. If you're not on the leading edge, you're on the bleeding edge. And the funders today are kind of decide, where do I want to be? But if you're stuck in the middle, it's kind of like, hey, we've been giving you money all these years, maybe it's time for you to go off and do something on your own. Let's go help the guys on the leading edge. And the ones that are really hurting, maybe we'll go help them. Do you know which part of the edge you're on? Right? It's a question that we have to ask ourselves. And so in the process, we then have to ask this. How many of you read this book? You guys heard it? Right? We're all hem and haw. We all know that. But there is this process, and for those that haven't read the book, it's really about the fact that we've become accustomed to a taste of a certain thing, a certain way of receiving it. In this case, it's cheese. But when someone moves a cheese, do you continue to chase the cheese, or do you find new sources of nutrition? And so our culture, it seems, as nonprofits, again, speaking from the different organizations I'm with, we continue to go to the same refrigerator that's completely empty and think that if I open the door a little slower, it'll appear. Or if I get there faster in the morning, it'll have shown up, right? And it's somehow, we tend to ignore, no, I don't want to see it. No, I don't want to hear it. No, let's not talk about it. But after a while, if that continues, it just doesn't smell so good. You know, so something's beginning to reek, and I don't think it's the cheese.